Hey guys, tonight we are going on a journey, but not one with maps and passports. Instead, we're traveling through time, back to a world lit by firelight and scented with wood smoke and damp earth. We're heading to medieval Europe. We're not storming castles or meeting kings. We're going to step into the quiet, often overlooked life of a female brewer, an alewife. Honestly, given the public hygiene standards of the time, the beer was probably safer than the water. So you've already made a smart career choice. You might just live past your first week. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a quiet and simple way to support this little corner of the internet. And while you're at it, I'd love to see you say hi in the comments. Tell me what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where these stories are landing. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you're aware of is the cold. Not a bitter, biting cold, but a persistent, damp chill that seems to seep up from the packed minus earth floor of your small home. It clings to the rough wool of your tunic and makes you want to curl back under the straw minus stuffed mattress. But you can't, through the single, unglazed window. The sky is a pale, milky grey. It's morning, and more importantly, it's brewing day. A voice, low and familiar, cuts through the quiet. It's your mother's. She's already up, her silhouette moving in the dim light of the central hearth, where embers glow like sleepy red eyes. Today is the day. Today, you stop being just a helper and start learning the art. Your heart. Your first real task is water. You grab to heavy wooden buckets, the iron bands cold against your fingers, and head outside. The air smells of wet leaves in the faint, ever-minus present scent of wood smoke from your neighbor's chimneys. The village well is a communal hub, but at this hour, it's peaceful. The rhythmic creak of the rope and pulley is the only sound as you haul up bucket after bucket of shockingly cold, cloudy water. This isn't the crystal minus clear stuff of fairy tales. It has character, and by character, I mean bits of sediment and a certain earthy flavor. But it's the water you have, the water everyone has, and it will soon be transformed. Back inside, the main event awaits. In the center of the room, looking more like a witch has prop than a piece of kitchen equipment, is the cauldron. It's massive, made of blackened iron, and hangs from a thick chain over the hearth. Your mother gestures for you to help her muscle it into a more stable position on the floor, away from the direct flame. Now comes the grain. It's barley, mostly, stored in a coarse burlap sack in the corner. You scoop it out. It's not a fine powder, but a roughly cracked meal, full of husky bits. The smell is dry, sweet, and dusty. This is the soul of your future ale. Your mother doesn't use a recipe book. Her instructions are a mix of gestures, quiet commands, and feelings. Enough water to cover your second knuckle, she might say, as you pour the buckets in. She teaches you to heat a portion of the water in the cauldron, not to a rolling boil, but until the steam rises in a steady plume and tiny bubbles cling to the sides. This is where the magic and the science begins. This is a mainstream historical fact for centuries. Brewing wasn't a commercial enterprise run by men in factories. It was domestic chemistry, performed by women in their own homes. It was a chore as fundamental as baking bread or mending clothes, a process known as alewife RY. You pour the heated water over the cracked barley in a huge wooden tub, the mashing tea went. A cloud of sweet minus smelling steamy rots, smelling intensely of porridge and warm earth. This is the mash. Your job now is to stir. The paddle is a heavy, almost ceremonial minus looking piece of wood, worn smooth from years, maybe generations, of use. It's surprisingly tiring work. Your shoulders begin to ache as you slowly, methodically, mix the grain and water, ensuring there are no dry clumps. Here's a little minus known tidbit for you. These mashing paddles were often considered a family heirloom. A good, solid paddle that had seen many successful brews was treasured, and there was a quiet superstition that the wood itself held the memory of good ale. You'd never, ever use it to stir the laundry or anything else. It had one purpose, and one purpose only. As you stir, your mother watches. Her approval is silent, a slight nod of her head. You're reactivating the enzymes in the malted barley, coaxing them to convert the starches into fermentable sugars. You don't know the words enzyme or starch conversion. Of course, you just know this is how it's done. This is how your grandmother taught your mother, and how her mother taught her. It's a chain of knowledge, tossed from hand to hand, not in books, but in the doing. Historians still have gentle debates about exactly why brewing became so firmly entrenched as women's work in the early medieval period. Was it simply because it was a home-based task that could be juggled with childcare and cooking? Or was it a more subtle form of economic power, allowing women to control a valuable commodity produced from the household's own grain surplus? The answer probably lies somewhere in the middle, a blend of practicality and quiet entrepreneurship. For now, though, you're not thinking about economics. You're thinking about the ache in your arms and the sweet, promising scent filling your small, smoky home. The first step is done. The mash will now sit and steep, a thick, warm porridge, doing its quiet work. You've taken your first step into a tradition as old as the village itself. An hour is past, maybe two. Time is measured differently here, marked by the slow crawl of light across the floor, not by the ticking of a clock. The sweet, thick smell of the mash has filled every corner of your small house, a comforting blanket of aroma. It's time for the separation. Your mother shows you how to carefully drain the liquid from the mash to you, and this isn't a neat and tidy process with stainless steel filters. It's a slow, careful ladling of the sweet liquid, which is now cold water, into the great iron cauldron. Or in a slightly more advanced setup, your TUN might have a spigot at the bottom, plugged with a simple wooden peg. You gently pull it out, and a stream of warm, brown, sticky liquid trickles out. You catch every precious drop. This is the goal. It's surprisingly sweet on the tongue, a sugary, grainy nectar. The leftover grains aren't wasted. Of course, they'll be mixed into bread dough or fed to the pig, if you're lucky enough to have one. Nothing is thrown away. Now the wort is back in the cauldron, hung once more over the fire. This time, it will be brought to a rolling boil. As the liquid heats, bubbles begin to break the surface, releasing a new wave of warm, bready steam. This boiling is crucial. It sanitizes the wort, killing off any unwanted wild bacteria or yeasts that might have been clinging to the grain or floating in the air. You don't know the science of it, but you know from experience if you skip this step, you risk a sour, undrinkable mess. This is a foundational pillar of brewing that has been understood through trial and error for centuries. The process of boiling the wort is a key step in ensuring a stable and palatable final product. While the wort bubbles away, your mother directs you to the small collection of dried herbs kept in a clay jar near the hearth. This isn't just about barley and water. Here's where a brewer's signature truly begins. Long before the universal adoption of hops, brewers used a wide variety of botanicals to flavor and preserve their ale. You might add a little dried heather for a floral note, bog myrtle for a bitter counterpoint, or even yarrow, which was believed to have intoxicating properties. The exact blend is your family's secret. Today, it's a pinch of this, a handful of that. The measurements are in your mother's eyes, not in a book. Now for the most important ingredient of all. It's not the water, nor the grain, nor the herbs. It's the secret your family has guarded for generations. Your mother retrieves it from a cool, dark corner. It's not a packet of powder or a vial of liquid. It is, to your modern eyes, a rather unimpressive minus-looking wooden stick. It's gnarled in dough, and coated in a flaky, pale crust. This is the family's bar-stick, or yeast-stick. That crust is a dormant colony of yeast, carefully preserved from the frothy head, the balm or croissant of the last successful brewer. This is a fascinating piece of lost technology. Before people understood what yeast was, they knew that something from a good batch of beer could start the next one. This magic stick, dipped into the cold wort, would inoculate it with the family's unique strain of yeast, which lived in the very pores of the wood. Some families had yeast minus rings or other cherished, yeast minus caked objects they would use. It was part heirloom, part tool, and part living organism. After the wort has boiled for a good while, the cauldron is taken off the fire. Now comes the most dangerous part of the day, cooling it down. It has to be cooled quickly. If left to cool slowly, it's a warm, sugary invitation for every wild, souring microbe in the air to move and unruin your hard work. You might pour it back and forth between buckets in the cool morning air, or, if you live near a stream, carefully submerge the pot in the running water. You work with a quiet urgency. Once the wort is merely warm to the touch, your mother tests it with a clean finger. A practiced and precise thermometer, it's time. The cooled wort is transferred to its final vessel, a large wooden fermentation barrel, with a reverence that borders on religious. Your mother takes the yeast minus stick and slowly stirs it into the sweet liquid. She murmurs a quiet prayer or a folk charm under her breath, a plea to the unseen forces that govern transformation. The stick is removed, cleaned, and carefully put away for the next time. Now you wait, and you hope. This is where a major debate among food historians comes into play. How consistent was medieval ale, without thermometers, hydrometers, or pure yeast cultures? Could an alewife ever truly replicate a bat? Some scholars argue that experienced brewers, using the same water, the same grain from the same supplier, and their own family yeast strain, could achieve a remarkable degree of consistency through feel, smell, and instinct. Others contend that it was a constant gamble, a slight change in ambient temperature, a stray wild yeast floating through the window, a variation in the grain harvest. Any of these could dramatically alter the final product. One batch might be sweet and strong, the next thin and sour. For you, standing in your small home, you simply have to trust the process. You trust your mother's hands, the family stick, and a little bit of luck. The barrel is covered with a loose cloth, just enough to keep dust and insect out, but allowing the byproducts of fermentation to escape. Your work, for today, is done. The rest is up to the quiet, invisible magic you've just awoken in that barrel. The next few days are a quiet exercise in patience. The barrel of wort sits in the corner of your main room, a silent, brooding presence. But it's not truly silent. If you lean in close, you can hear a faint fizzing, a gentle choosing sound, like a secret being whispered. A thick, rocky foam, the cross end, begins to build on the surface of the liquid. It smells wonderfully alive. The sharp, bready, and slightly fruity aroma that now mixes with the daily sense of wood smoke and cooking. This is the yeast, awakened at work, devouring the sugars and creating alcohol and carbon dioxide. You watch your mother as she goes about her other chores, but her attention is never far from the barrel. Just the living embodiment of a central truth of medieval life. A woman's work was never done, and it was rarely a single specialty. Brewing was just one part of your world. On non-minus brewing days, you are still mending clothes by the weak light of a tallow candle, tending to the small kitchen garden where you grow leeks and onions, or helping to churn the milk from your neighbor's cow into butter. Each task flows into the next in a seamless rhythm of domestic necessity. The ale is not a hobby. It's a crucial part of your household's economy, a way to turn a surplus of grain into a more valuable, more durable, and frankly, more enjoyable commodity. This is the role of the alewife or brewster, the term brewster being the original feminine form of brewer. You are not just a producer. You are the manager of the household's resources. Historians have shown through court records and tax rolls that in many English villages during the 13th and 14th centuries, a significant portion of households, sometimes more than half, had women who brewed ale for sale, not just for their own families. This wasn't some quaint side-minus hustle. It was a vital, semi-minus public role that placed women at the center of the local economy. Your kitchen was just a place for family meals. It was a small minus-scale factory, a laboratory, and soon, a retail outlet. Your home itself reflects this. It's a simple, one-minus room dwelling, what historians sometimes call a sea-rock house. built around A-shaped timber frames. The floor is packed earth, perhaps strewn with reeds or herbs to keep the dust down and add a fresh scent. Smoke from the open hearth in the center of the room finds its way out through a simple hole in the thatched roof, a feature that made fires a constant, terrifying threat for everyone. The furniture is sparse and functional: a rough hewn table, a couple of benches, sleeping pallets stuffed with straw, and of course, the tools of your trade: the cauldron, the mashing tun, the fermentation barrels. It's cramped, it's smoky, but it's the entire world of your family. Here's a curious detail about your daily life that is often overlooked: the constant struggle against dampness. With thatched roofs that weren't perfectly waterproof and packed earth floors, everything was perpetually a little bit down. This meant a constant battle against mold and rot. Woolen clothes, stored grain, and even the wooden tools had to be carefully managed on dirt out. It also meant that the dry, relatively warm space near the hearth was the most valuable real estate in the house, reserved for rising bread dough, sleeping babies, and, of course, a fermenting barrel of ale that needed a consistent temperature to work its magic. As the fermentation slows down, the foamy head on the ale begins to recede. Your mother knows the sign. She dips a small ladle in for a taste. She doesn't swish it around like a modern sommelier. She takes a sip, her expression unreadable, just checking for sweetness, for sourness, for the subtle flavors that tell her the story of this particular batch. She nods. It's ready. The yeast has done its job. But what exactly was that job? This is where academic debate gets quite interesting. Historians and archaeobiologists argue about the specific strains of yeast used in medieval brewing. Were they top-fermenting yeasts like those used for modern ales, or a wild mix? DNA analysis of residue from ancient pottery shards suggests that brewers were often working with a complex cocktail of multiple yeast strains and even some bacteria, a sort of house starter for beer. This might explain the huge variation in regional beer styles. The yeast in your village, passed down on your family's barn stick, might produce a completely different flavor profile from the yeast used in a village just a few miles away. You didn't just have a family recipe. You had a family microbiome, a living inheritance that defined the taste of your ale. The ale is now carefully transferred into storage casks or pottery jugs, leaving the thick layer of yeast sediment at the bottom of the barrel, and a portion of that frothy barn, rich with living yeast, is carefully scooped out and smeared back onto the barn stick, where it will dry, waiting to begin the cycle all over again. The chain remains unbroken. Your kitchen, for now, falls quiet, but not for long. The next stage of your work is about to begin selling it. The ale is ready. It's young, cloudy, and still alive with a light fizz. It won't last long, maybe a week or two at most, before it starts to turn sour, so there's no time to waste. No, you have to let people know you have a fresh batch for sale. In a world without signs, social media, or even widespread literacy, you rely on a simple, elegant, and universally understood symbol. You go to the door of your small house, and you place a long pole or a bundle of sticks, often birch twigs, in a holder by the entrance, extending it out over the street. This is the ale minus stake, or sometimes an ale minus bush. This practice is one of the most charming and well-documented facts of medieval life. It was the original low-stake open for business sign. Anyone walking down the street, from the local farmer to a traveling merchant, would see the stake and know that your household had fresh ale available. It was an invitation, turning your private home into a public house, an ale minus house. For as long as the supply lasted, the length of the stake itself sometimes became a point of contention. Some brewers, eager to attract attention, would use ridiculously long poles that jutted far into the roadway, obstructing traffic and annoying the neighbors. In some towns, like London and Cambridge, authorities had to pass laws regulating the maximum length of an ale minus stake. You, however, are not so ostentatious. Your stake is modest, a simple branch of green leaves tied to a pole, a clear and honest signal. You swept the area in front of your door, and perhaps set out a rough, wooden bench if the weather is fair. Your home is now open. You are no longer just a brewster, the maker. You are now a publican, a seller. The tools of this new trade are simple. You have a collection of earthenware jugs and perhaps some wooden or leather mugs. Gold jacks. You have a series of standard measures a gallon, a bottle half minus gallon, a quart certified and stamped by a local official to ensure you aren't cheating your customers. Using an inaccurate measure was a serious offense, one that could lead to fines or public shaming. Your reputation depended on serving honest, full pints. A little minus known aspect of this whole minus-based commerce is the credit system. Many of your first customers are your neighbors, and they often don't pay with coin. Instead, you keep a mental tally, or more likely, you mark a tally stick. This was a simple piece of wood where you would carve notches to represent the amount of ale someone had purchased on credit. The stick was then split in half lengthwise. Through the notches, you kept one half, your customer kept the other. When it was time to settle the debt, the two halves were brought together to make sure they matched perfectly, a simple but effective medieval anti-minus fraud device. This created a web of trust and obligation that tied the community together. The line between domestic space and commercial space is completely blurred. Customers don't stand politely in a designated bar area. They come right into your main living space. They might sit on the bench by the fire, sharing news and gossip, while your children play on the floor nearby. Your kitchen becomes the village's social media feed. Here you learn who is getting married, whose cow is sick, and what the lord of the manor is planning for the next harvest. It's a role that requires not just good ale, but good social skills, the ability to listen, to mediate small disputes, and to know when to politely ask a rowdy customer to leave. This blending of home and business is a key reason why historians argue that this period was a unique window of economic opportunity for women. You could earn an income without leaving your home, allowing you to simultaneously manage your domestic responsibilities. But this also brings up a fascinating point of debate in feminist history. Was this empowering, or was it a trap? On one hand, you were a business owner, controlling a product and its profits. You were a respected figure in your community. On the other hand, your work was confined to the domestic sphere, and as we'll see later, this made it vulnerable. It wasn't seen as a real profession in the same way that smithing or carpentry was. Professions that were already becoming organized into male-dominated guilds. For now, you exist in a gray area, a powerful but informal economic force. You stand by your open door, waiting for the first customer. A farmer, leading his ox home from the fields, spots your ale state. He stops, a tired but friendly smile on his face. He has no coins, but he offers you a small basket of fresh ale. You agree to the trade. He comes in, sits for a moment, and you feel his leather flask from your cars. The first sale is made. The sweet, malty aroma of your ale begins to mix with the sounds and smells of the village, a sign that your hard work is about to pay off. One jug at a time. The first customer is followed by another, and then another. A pair of women on their way back from the river, their laundry baskets balanced on their heads, stop for a quick jug to take home. A traveling peddler, his pack full of ribbons and tin whistles, sees your ale steak and decides to rest his weary feet for a moment. Your small, smoky home begins to fill with the low hum of conversation. This is the heart of your business, not just selling a product, but providing a space. Your kitchen, just hours ago a quiet domestic scene, has transformed. It is now the village's unofficial gathering place, a temporary social club. The rough hewn bench you set out is now occupied. Others find a seat on an upturned bucket, or simply lean against the wattle and daub walls. This is a far cry from the cozy, wood panel pubs we imagine today. It's cramped. The air is thick with the smell of damp wool, wood smoke, and your fresh ale. Light is poor, filtering in through the open door in the single, small window, supplemented by the flickering glow of the central hearth. You move through the small crowd with a practiced grace, refiling jugs, making change, and keeping an ear on the various conversations. This is a crucial part of your role. You are a hub of information. Here, News travels faster than any messenger on horseback. You learn that the miller is charging a bit more for grinding grain this week, that Lord Gilbert's wife is expecting another child, and that a wolf was spotted near the northern pastures. This information isn't just gossip. It's vital for survival in a small, interconnected community. Knowing these things helps you navigate your own life and business. This is a well-established historical reality alehouses were the primary centers for news and social exchange in medieval villages. Here's a small, peculiar detail about the drinking vessels of the time. Communal drinking was very common. While you have individual mugs for those who can afford their own serving, it was unusual for a group to share a larger jug or a wooden bowl, passing it from person to person. One such vessel was the mazer, a wide, shallow bowl often made from maple wood, sometimes with a silver or silver-minus gilt band around the rim. Sharing a drink from a mazer was a sign of fellowship and trust. It also, from a modern perspective, was an incredibly efficient way to share germs. But in a world without germ theory, the social ritual was what mattered most. The atmosphere is mostly friendly, a welcome respite from a day of hard labor, but it could also be tense. Arguments could break out. Old grievances could surface after a few jugs. Part of your job is to be a peacekeeper. You have a reputation to maintain. A house known for brawls and trouble would soon lose customers. Your authority, as a woman in this space, is not based on physical strength, but on social standing and respect. A sharp word from you, the alewife, is often enough to quell a rising dispute. This brings up a debate among social historians: how much real authority did an alewife wield? Some argue that her control was absolute within her own home. She could refuse service to anyone and her word was law. Records show women bringing charges against customers for non-minus payment or disruptive behavior. Others suggest that this authority was fragile and easily challenged, especially by men who might not take kindly to being told what to do by a woman. The reality likely varied greatly from person to person. A woman with a strong personality and a supportive family network could likely run her house with an iron fist, while a more timid or isolated woman might struggle to maintain order. As dusk begins to settle, the light in your home grows dimmer. The fire in the hearth is built up, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The faces of your neighbors are illuminated in the warm, flickering light. The hum of conversation deepens. You've had a good day. The cask is noticeably lighter, and you have a small collection of coins, a few eggs, and a tally stick with new notches carved into it. You are tired, but your work has brought your community together, right here, in the heart of your home. The success of your brewing day and the brisk trade that followed is a source of pride, but it also brings a certain low-level anxiety. It means a visitor is imminent. A few days after your L-day goes up, you hear a distinctive, authoritative knock on your door. It's not a neighbor dropping by for a friendly chat. You open the door to find a man, usually someone appointed by the manorial court or the village council, standing there with a look of stern importance. This is the official Ale-taster, or Ale-scholar. His job is to enforce the Assize of Bredendale. The Assize of Bredendale was a real and very important English law, first enacted in the 13th century, designed to regulate the price and quality of these two essential staples. It was just about protecting consumers. It was about maintaining social order. Bredendale were the fuel of the working population, and a sudden spike in price or a drop in quality could lead to riots and civil unrest. The law linked the price of a loaf of bread and a gallon of ale to the current price of grain. As the price of barley went up, so could the price of your ale, but only by a set amount. The Ale-taster was the local enforcer of this national law. He enters your home without much ceremony, his eyes scanning your setup. HES not here for a friendly drink. HES here on official business. His task is to check the quality of your ale and to ensure you are using correct legal measures. He'll inspect your gallon and quart pots, looking for the official stamp that proves they are of a legitimate size. Using a short measure was a common way for a dishonest brewer to increase their profits, and it was his job to catch it. Then comes the main event, the tasting. He doesn't just take a polite sip. He demands a full mug. He holds it up, not to the light as there's little to be had, but to get a sense of the color and clarity. He takes a long, slow draught, swishing it in his mouth. He is silent, his face a mask of concentration. You stand there, wiping your hands on your apron, your heart beating a little faster. His judgment can make or break your reputation. If he declares your ale to be good and wholesome, his seal of approval will spread through the village, and customers will flock to your door. If he deems it thin, sour, or unwholesome ale, your entire batch might be forfeit. The punishment for selling bad ale could range from a simple fine to the public humiliation of being forced to drink a large quantity of your own terrible brew, with the rest poured over your head. Here we come to a truly bizarre and wonderful historical tidbit, a piece of folklore that is so strange it just has to be shared. One of the legendary, if likely apocryphal, methods for testing ale quality involved the taster's trousers. The story goes that an ale-minus taster would wear a sturdy pair of leather breeches. He would purposefully spill a small amount of the ale onto a wooden bench and then sit in the puddle for a good half an hour, continuing his business. At the end of that time, he would stand up. If his leather breeches stuck firmly to the bench, it was a sign that the ale was good. The stickiness was believed to come from the residual sugars in a well-minus brewed, strong ale. If he stood up too easily, it meant the ale was thin and watery. While historians are highly skeptical that this was ever a widespread or official practice, the very existence of the story tells you how seriously people took the quality and character of their ale. It was a physical, tangible thing. You watch the taster's face for any sign, a slight frown, a thoughtful nod. He finally swallows and gives a grunt of non-committal acknowledgement. He then names the price you are allowed to charge, based on his assessment of its strength and the current price of barley. A penny for the gallon, he might declare, or perhaps 3 farthings for the pottle. You are expected to abide by this price. To charge more was to risk being fined at the next session of the manorial court. This official scrutiny brings us to an ongoing debate among historians about the lives of medieval women. Did regulations like the assize of bread and ale represent an oppressive system that limited a woman's economic freedom, or did they offer a form of protection? On one hand, the law restricted your pricing and put you under the authority of a male official. It codified your business and subjected it to the same rules as any other trade. On the other hand, the very existence of the law was a form of official recognition. It acknowledged that what you were doing was a legitimate and important part of the economy. It also gave you, the brewer, recourse. If a customer refused to pay the officially sanctioned price, you had the law on your side. So was he a frustrating bureaucrat, hindering your entrepreneurial spirit, or a necessary part of a system that legitimized your work? The answer, as is so often the case in history, is probably a bit of both. The ale-minus taster finishes his inspection, makes a note on a wax tablet or a scrap of parchment, and takes his leave, usually without paying for the mug he just drank. That was his perk of the job. You closed the door behind him, letting out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. He approved. Your ale is good, your measures are true, and your price is set. For now, you are safe. You can continue to sell your ale with confidence, your reputation intact, until the next batch and the next official visit. The ale-minus taster's approval gives you a few days of confident, steady business. Neighbors and travelers alike come and go, your cask slowly emptying, your small cache of coins and bartered goods growing. But the life of a brewster is one of constant vigilance, because disaster is always just one batch away. One morning, you go to the corner where your newest barrel is quietly fermenting. Usually, by this stage, the air would be filled with that sharp, fruity, ruddy scent of active yeast. But today, something is wrong. You lean in closer. Instead of the familiar, comforting smell, there's a distinct, sharp tang in the air. They smell like vinegar. Your stomach sinks. You dip a small ladle into the barrel and pull out a sample. The liquid is cloudier than it should be, and the taste, it's sour, acrid and unpleasant. There's no mistaking it. The batch has turned. It's spoiled. This was the single greatest fear for any brewer, a common and devastating occurrence. In a world without sterilization, pasteurization, or pure yeast cultures, you were in a constant battle against invisible enemies, wild yeasts and bacteria. The most common culprit was Insectibota, a bacterium that is harmless to humans, but is incredibly efficient at turning alcohol into acetic acid vinegar. It could have been floating in the air, hiding in the wood of a not perfectly cleaned barrel, or it could have hitched a ride on a fruit fly that dove into your cooling water. You don't know the science, you just know the heartbreaking result. All that hard work, the expensive grain, the long hours of stirring and boiling, all of it has resulted in a barrel of undrinkable sour ale. This is more than just a culinary failure. It's a significant economic blow. The grain you used was not free. It either came from your family's unlimited harvest, meaning there's less to make bread with, or you purchased it from a neighbor or at the local market. That investment is now completely lost. You can't sell this. If you were foolish enough to try, your reputation would be ruined instantly. The ale taster would have you fined, and you'd become the subject of village gossip and ridicule. So what do you do with a large barrel of sour ale? You can't just pour it down a drain. You don't have one. Pouring it into the street would create a stinking, fly-infested puddle and earn you the wrath of your neighbors. This brings us to a fascinating bit of domestic ingenuity. While the spoiled ale was useless as a beverage, it wasn't entirely useless. Its primary second life was as a cleaning agent. The acidity of the ale cigar, as it was sometimes called, made it a surprisingly effective household cleaner. You could use it to scrub floors, scour greasy pots, or to scale the inside of your cauldron. It was also used in the tanning process for leather or by weavers to help fix certain dyes. You might be able to trade the barrel to a local artisan for a small fee, recouping a tiny fraction of your loss. But its value as a cleaner was pennies compared to its value as a drink. This constant risk of spoilage is a key reason why historians argue that brewing, despite being a female-dominated trade, was not an easy path to wealth. It was precarious. You could have 3 successful, profitable batches in a row, and then one sour batch could wipe out all your gains. This precarious shaped the business practices of alewives. It's why they brewed in relatively small batches and tried to sell it quickly. They weren't aging barrels for months in a cellar. They were practicing a form of just time production born of necessity. The emotional toll is also significant. You feel a sense of personal failure. The bar stick that worked so well last time. Did you do something wrong when you stored it? Was the barrel not cleaned thoroughly enough? Did you not cool the wort fast enough? You might blame it on bad luck, or even on supernatural forces. In an age where belief in curses and the evil eye was common, a sudden, inexplicable failure like this could feel like a malevolent act. This touches on a more sinister academic debate, the connection between skilled women and accusations of witchcraft. Historians have noted that an unusual number of women accused of witchcraft were brewers or healers, women who worked with transformations, who understood the hidden properties of plants and yeasts. A brewer whose ale was consistently, almost supernaturally good might be respected, but she might also be feared, and a rival brewer, suffering a sour batch, might whisper that their misfortune was the result of a neighbor's curse. For now, you don't have time for suspicion. You have a practical problem to solve. With the help of your husband or son, you have to haul the heavy barrel outside. The stench as you pour out the sour liquid is a public announcement of your failure. Neighbors will see, and they will know. You feel a flush of shame, but you also feel a renewed determination. You scrub the barrel with sand and hot water, letting it dry in the sun, hoping to kill whatever invisible demon took root in the wood. You have to start over. You have to go back to the beginning, back to the well for water, back to the sack of precious grain, and try again. This failure is a stark reminder that your livelihood depends on a delicate, and often unpredictable, balance of skill, cleanliness, and sheer luck. After the disheartening task of dealing with the spoiled batch, you know you can't afford another failure. You need every element to be perfect this time, and that includes the most vital of an ingredient, the yeast. Or your family's bar stick is your primary source. Sometimes, After a failed batch, or if the yeast seems sluggish, you need a fresh infusion. This is where one of the most important alliances in the medieval village comes into play: the relationship between the brewster and the baker. You walk through the village, the smell of your neighbor's wood smoke giving way to a more delicious, comforting aroma, the smell of baking bread. You arrive at the baker's house, which often doubled as the village's communal oven. He, unlike you, is almost always a he. Baking, especially on a commercial scale, was a physically demanding job that was already professionalizing and becoming dominated by men who would eventually form powerful guilds. But your professions are deeply, symbiotically linked. You and the baker are partners in a dance of fermentation. You both rely on the same magical organism, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, to make your products rise. You need it to make your ale foam. He needs it to make his bread light and airy, and you often share it. On a day when his starter is sluggish, he might come to you for a scoop of the rich, frothy balm from the top of your fermenting ale. It would be whisked into his dough, providing a powerful leavening boost. Today, however, you are the one in need. You approach the baker with a clean, empty clay pot. You've come for some of his leaven or starter. It's a bubbly, slightly sour-smelling mass of flour and water dough, teeming with the same family of yeast you use. He scoops a generous portion into your pot. This is usually not a cash transaction. It's part of the village's intricate web of barter and mutual support. You might pay him with a jug of your next successful batch of ale, or perhaps you owe him a favor. This exchange highlights a fundamental truth of the medieval economy. It ran on relationships. This symbiotic relationship between brewers and bakers is a well-established historical fact. They were natural allies, their shops often located near each other. They bought their grain from the same miller and shared a core technology. In some historical records, they are even referred to as yeast-sisters, acknowledging the or oral, cooperative nature of their businesses. Even if one of them was a man, with your fresh pot of leaven, you head back home. You won't use this dough directly in your ale. Instead, you'll use it to wake up and strengthen the yeast on your own balm-stick. You might make a small, sugary wort and add the baker's leaven to it. Once it's bubbling away happily, you'll dip your stick in, allowing a new, vigorous colony of yeast to take hold in the wood. You are refreshing your family's strain, a biological reset to ensure a strong, healthy fermentation. This brings us to a weirdly fascinating bit of food science history. What did this sharing do to the flavor of the products? Because they were constantly swapping yeast cultures, the bread in your village likely had a slightly beery or ale-like flavor, and your ale probably had some sour, dough-like characteristics. The distinct flavor profiles we expect today from a loaf of bread versus a pint of ale were much more blended. They were part of a single, local flavor terroir created by the village's unique microbiome, the yeast that lived in the baker's oven, in your brewing barrels, and even in the air of the village itself, gave your food and drink a taste that was completely unique to your specific place on earth. As you prepare for the new brew, you reflect on this interdependence. Your success is tied to the bakers, but it's also tied to the farmer who grew the barley, the miller who ground it, and the woodsman who supplied the firewood for your hearth. This intricate network of reliance is a defining feature of your life. It fostered a strong sense of community, but it also meant that a failure in one part of the chain could affect everyone. A bad harvest meant less grain for you and the baker. A broken millstone meant no one got flour. This interdependence has been a subject of debate for economic historians. Was this system a primitive, inefficient form of economy that held back progress, or was it a resilient, sustainable model that ensured community survival? The argument for the former is that it discouraged specialization and large-scale production. The argument for the latter is that it was incredibly robust in a world without complex supply chains or government safety nets. This system of mutual support was what kept the community from collapsing during hard times. When your batch of ale failed, you didn't go bankrupt and close up shop. You turned to your neighbor, the baker, and you started again. You now have everything you need: fresh water, good grain, and a newly invigorated yeast culture. thanks to your ally down the street. The failure of the last batch stings, but it has been a lesson in humility and a reminder of your place within the larger village ecosystem. You are not an island. You are a brewster, and your craft is woven into the very fabric of your community. As reliant on the baker's starter as he is on your bomb, the cauldron goes back over the fire. The process begins anew. Your new batch of ale ferments beautifully. The smell in your cottage is sweet and strong, a sign of healthy yeast and a promising outcome. You put out your ale steak with a renewed sense of confidence. The regulars return, and everyone agrees that this batch is particularly good. But you are not the only one in the village with an ale steak out this week. A few doors down, good wife Agnes also has a fresh branch of birch hanging by her door. Very friendly, but undeniable. Competition begins. This was the reality in most medieval villages. You weren't a monopolist. There were often several other women, your neighbors, who were also brewing and selling ale from their homes. This created a subtle but constant beer war, a battle for customers and reputation fought not with swords, but with an ale stake in the quality of what was in your cares. This wasn't a cutthroat corporate rivalry. It was a deeply personal competition between neighbors who you saw every day at the well and at church. Your primary weapon in this war is the quality and character of your ale. Does yours have a slightly sweeter, maltier flavor? Perhaps Agnes uses a different blend of herbs in her giahuit, giving hers a more bitter, medicinal tang. Customers would have their preferences. John the Thatcher might prefer your brew, while William the Carter might be a loyal customer of Agnes's. This is the birth of brand loyalty, long before the concept of branding ever existed. Your brand was simply your name and the consistent flavor profile that came out of your fermentation barrel. This competition is a well-documented aspect of medieval village life, often visible in the records of the manorial courts. Alewives would sometimes bring charges against each other, accusing a rival of slandering their ale, of stealing customers, or, most commonly, of breaking the size by charging a lower price to undercut them. These records paint a vivid picture of the small-scale economic rivalries that simmered beneath the surface of communal life. The competition also played out in less official ways. A bit of strategic gossip. Perhaps you might casually mention to a customer that you heard Agnes's last batch was a bit thin. Nothing malicious, of course, just a little tidbit of information. In return, you might hear a rumor that your measures are a little short this week. It was a delicate game of managing your public image. Your greatest assets were a reputation for good, strong ale, full measures, and a welcoming, orderly house. Here's a curious little detail that sometimes played a role in these rivalries: the ale whist. We've talked about the ale steak, the sign that you were open for business. The ale wisp was a related, but different, object. It was often a small bundle of straw or twigs attached to the stake, and it served as a kind of advertisement for the quality of the ale. A bit bushy wisp might signal a particularly strong or noteworthy batch. You might put out an especially fine looking wisp this week, a subtle visual cue to passers-by that this is a batch not to be missed, perhaps even better than the one on offer down the street. It was a simple, non-verbal form of marketing. The beer wars could also, on occasion, turn less friendly. Imagine a scenario where a major festival is approaching, like May Day or the harvest celebration. Everyone will want to buy extra ale. This is a huge sales opportunity. You and Agnes both brew a special, stronger batch for the occasion. The first one to sell out is the winner, earning not just more money, but also bragging rights as the village's premier brewer for the season. The pressure is on. This constant, low-level competition raises an interesting question for historians who study medieval women's economic lives. Did this competition foster innovation and quality, or did it create a stressful, catty environment that ultimately undermined female solidarity? Some historians argue that it was a healthy economic driver. The need to outdo your rivals pushed you to be a better brewer, to maintain a cleaner house, and to offer better service. It kept the quality of ale in the village high. Others, however, point to the court records filled with accusations and counter-minus accusations as evidence that it could create discord and friction among women, playing into a patriarchal system that benefited from keeping women from forming a united front. It's likely both are true. Your relationship with Agnes is complex. She is your rival, but she is also your neighbor. If your cow were to get sick, she would be one of the first to offer help. If her child fell ill, you would do the same. You are competitors, but you are also part of the same community, bound by the same ties of mutual reliance. For today, the competition is friendly. A customer, a local carpenter, leaves Agnes's house and stops by yours on his way home. Agnes's is good today, he says with a grin, but I told her I had to see if yours was better. You fill his jug, and he takes a sip. He nods in appreciation. You win today, good wife, he says. You feel a small, private surge of victory. It's not about driving Agnes out of business. It's about the quiet pride of being the best, even if it's just for today, in the endless, gentle beer war of your small medieval village. Your victory in the friendly beer war with good wife Agnes was satisfying, but it also highlights the central question of your craft: what makes your ale yours? The water is from the same village well. The barley is likely from the same local fields. The real difference, the source of your unique brand, lies in a jealously guarded secret, the recipe for your GRU. Today, when we think of beer, we automatically think of hops. The bitter, aromatic flavor of hops is now synonymous with ale and beer the world over, but for much of the medieval period, especially in places like England, hops were either unknown or used very sporadically. Before the widespread adoption of hops, the primary way to flavor, bitter, and preserve ale was with a complex mixture of herbs and spices known as GRU, sometimes spelled GRUT or grout. This is a fundamental historical point for centuries. Beer was not a hop-based beverage. GRU, it wasn't a single recipe. It was a broad category, a concept. The exact composition was a proprietary secret, passed down from mother to daughter, that defined the taste of a family's ale. Your GRU, it is what makes your ale taste different from Agnes. You keep your dried herbs in separate clay pots or leather pouches, hidden away from prying eyes. The blend is your intellectual property. The base of most GRU recipes in Northern Europe often included threek, or herbs sweet gale, also known as bog myrtle, yarrow, and wild rosemary. Sweet gale provided a pleasant aroma and a mild bitterness. Wild rosemary added a piney, resinous note. Yarrow was the most interesting of the three. It was known to have psychoactive properties, and was believed to increase the intoxicating effects of the ale, a property mentioned in writings from the period. So when you added yarrow to your brew, you weren't just adding flavor, you were adding an extra kick. But the recipe could include a huge variety of other things, depending on what was available locally or what you could afford to trade for. You might add heather flowers for a floral, honey minus like sweetness. You might use juniper berries for a char, gin minus like flavor, or mugwort for its supposed medicinal properties. Some recipes called for more exotic, expensive ingredients that might be purchased from a traveling spice merchant, like grains of paradise, ginger, or aniseed. Brewing a special batch for a wedding or a holiday might involve splurging on a pinch of something rare to make it truly memorable. Here's a particularly strange and fascinating tidbit about GRU. Some recipes included ingredients that we would find truly bizarre today. Things like tree bark, pine needles, or even hallucinogenic plants like henbane were sometimes used, though likely in very small, controlled quantities. Henbane, in particular, is a powerful delirium and poison, and its inclusion is a subject of much debate. Historians who study the archaeo-chemistry of ancient beverages are still trying to figure out how widespread this practice was. Was it a common, if risky, way to make a potent brew, or was it the stuff of myth and legend, perhaps linked to the idea of witches' brews? The evidence is murky, but it suggests that some medieval ales might have had effects that went far beyond simple drunkenness. The control over GRU, it was also a source of power and money. In some parts of continental Europe, particularly in the Holy Roman Empire. Certain powerful families or bishops held a Great Geotra. This was a legal monopoly on the sale of the Great mixture itself. If you were a brewer in one of these regions, you couldn't just go out and pick your own herbs. You were legally required to purchase your Great from the holder of the monopoly. This was a hugely profitable enterprise and a way for secular and religious lords to exert control over the brewing industry. In England, where you live, the system was generally more relaxed, allowing you the freedom to create your own signature blend. This freedom is what allows your small minor scale, homespun rivalry with Agnes to exist. This brings us to a historical debate: why did hops eventually win? Why did this rich, diverse tradition of Great ale all but disappear? The traditional answer is that hops were simply better. Hops have powerful and time-applicable properties, meaning they act as a much more effective preservative than most Great herbs. An unhopped ale might last a week or two, while hopped beer could be stored for months, allowing it to be produced on a larger scale and shipped over longer distances. Hops also provided a pleasant bitterness and aroma that people grew to like. But some revisionist historians argue it wasn't just a matter of taste or preservation. They suggest the transition was also political. The rise of hops, which could be grown and traded freely by anyone, helped to break the power of the Great monopolies. It was a victory for a more open, commercial market and a blow to the old feudal system of control. But for you, in your kitchen, these grand political shifts are far in the future. Your focus is on your small collection of clay pots. You measure out your secret blend: a generous handful of sweet ale, a smaller pinch of yarrow, a sprig of rosemary. It's the taste of home. It's the flavor your family is known for. It's the magic that turns simple grain and water into your ale, and no one else's. Your reputation in the village is solid. Your ale is consistently good. Your measures are fair. And your house is a place of good cheer. You are a respected member of the community, a successful small-minus business owner. But with this success comes a subtle and unnerving undercurrent of suspicion. You are a woman who works with transformations. You take grain and water and, through a mysterious process involving strange herbs and a magic stick, you create a potent, mood-altering beverage. In a world steeped in superstition, the line between a skilled brewster and a witch could be perilously thin. This connection is not just a fantasy trope. It has roots in the social realities of the medieval and early modern periods. Think about the iconography we associate with a witch: a woman, often older, standing over a bubbling cauldron, stirring a potion with a large paddle. Perhaps with a black cat nearby, a practical Mauser in a grain miner storing household, and a broomstick by the door, a tool sometimes used to clean the oven, or, symbolically, related to the ale miner stake. Many of the tools of your trade, the cauldron, the paddle, the herbs, are the very same props that would later be used to depict malevolent witchcraft. You start to notice it in small ways. A batch of ale that turns out exceptionally well, unusually strong and flavorful, might earn you praise, but also a few sidelong glances. It's as if you charmed the barrel. Good wife, a customer might say, meaning it as a compliment. But the word charmed hangs in the air for a moment too long. Conversely, if a neighbor's batch of ale inexplicably sours shortly after you've had a minor disagreement with them, they might not blame it on a sector order. They might blame it on you, on a sour look or a muttered word. This precarious position is a well-documented historical phenomenon. Women who operated independently, who had specialized knowledge, and who held a degree of economic power outside the direct control of a husband or father, were often targets of social anxiety. The brewster, or alewife, fit this description perfectly. She was a chemist without a license, a businesswoman in a domestic space. Her success depended on secret knowledge, the Great recipe, the handling of the yeast that was not widely understood by the general populace. Here is a strange but telling linguistic tidbit: the very words used to describe your craft could be double-edged. The word brew itself is etymologically related to words for magic and incantation. A potion was originally just a word for a drink or a dose of medicine. A charm could be a prayer or a recipe, the language used to describe your legitimate, Skilled work was uncomfortably close to the language that would be used in a witch trial. You might murmur a quiet prayer or a folk rhyme over your fermenting barrel for good luck, a common practice for generations. But, to a suspicious observer, that same prayer could be twisted into the casting of a spell. Historians are still debating the extent to which brewing was a direct cause for witchcraft accusations, and it's important not to overstate the case. The major witch hunts were a feature of the later early modern period, not the high medieval era you currently inhabit. However, the seeds of these later accusations were sown in the social structures and beliefs of your time. The idea of the souring witch, a witch who could curdle milk, spoil butter, and, yes, ruin a batch of ale, was a common trope in European folklore long before the trials began in earnest. This folklore reflected a deep-seated anxiety about the fragility of the food supply and the mysterious processes of fermentation and preservation, processes largely controlled by women. You feel this pressure as a need to maintain a careful social balance. You must be successful, but not too successful. You must be skilled, but your skill must be presented as a result of hard work and tradition, not uncanny or supernatural ability. You are careful to attend church regularly, to be seen as a pious and upstanding member of the community. You are generous with your neighbors and quick to squash any rumors with a friendly word or a shared jug of ale. You are, in essence, constantly managing your own public relations to keep suspicion at bay. One afternoon, a woman from the other side of the village comes to your door. Her face is grim. She explains that her last 2 batches of ale have gone sour, and she's heard that your ale is always good. She doesn't ask for your recipe. She asks if you can bless her brewing equipment or give her a charm to ward off the bad luck. You are put in an impossible position. To agree would be to admit you have some kind of special power. To refuse might be seen as a spiteful act, confirming her suspicion that you are hoarding your magic for yourself. You handle it carefully, giving her a bit of your own very healthy balm from your last batch and some practical advice about scalding her barrels with hot water. You frame it as practical knowledge, not magic, but the encounter leaves you feeling uneasy. You are walking a tightrope. Your skill provides your livelihood, but it also makes you vulnerable. The respect you've earned is tinged with a faint, unspoken fear. For now, it's just whispers inside, long glances, but you are keenly aware that the same cauldron that makes your celebrated ale could, in a different light, be seen as something far more sinister. Life continues in its familiar rhythm of brewing, sewing, and managing your household. The subtle anxieties about reputation and rivalry are a constant backdrop, but the work itself is grounding. Then, one day, a traveler passing through the village brings something new to your attention. A merchant who has been to the Low Countries, to Flanders and Holland, and he talks of a new kind of ale he tasted there. It has a different sort of bitterness, a clean, sharp, and lingering flavor, unlike the earthy, sometimes perfumed taste of your GRU ale. He says it's made with a flower that grows on a vine, a plant called hops. He might even have a small, dried cone to show you. It looks like a delicate, pale green, tapery flower. You crush it between your fingers, and it releases a powerful, pungent aroma, citrusy, piney, and intensely bitter. It's a completely alien smell. This is your first introduction to a plant that will, over the next 2 centuries, completely revolutionize your craft and ultimately bring an end to the era of the alewife. This is a major turning point in the history of beer. The introduction of hops to English brewing was a slow, creeping process. At first, you and your fellow brewers are skeptical. This is a foreign ingredient, a strange innovation from across the channel. Why would you abandon the GRU recipes that have served your family for generations in favor of this aggressive, bitter flower? Early hopped beers were often called simply beer, to distinguish them from the traditional, unhopped ale that you made. For a time, ale and beer were two distinct products, but the advantages of hops, you begin to hear, are undeniable. The primary one, as the merchant explains, is preservation. The resins in hops contain powerful antimicrobial compounds. An ale brewed with hops lasts much longer than your GRU ale. It can survive for weeks, even months, without souring. This is a game changer. It means ale, or rather, beer can be made in larger quantities, stored for longer periods, and transported over greater distances without spoiling. You decide, out of curiosity, to try it. Getting your hands on hops is the first challenge. They aren't growing in the hedgerows like yarrow or sweet gale. You have to purchase them, likely from a specialized merchant in a larger market town. They are an expensive cash commodity. Unlike the herbs you can forage for free. This, in itself, is a significant shift in your business model. It requires you to have capital upfront. You brew a small, experimental batch. You're not sure how much to use. You replace your familiar GIU mixture with a handful of these dried, pungent flowers, adding them during the boil as the merchant instructed. The smell that fills your home during the boil is entirely different, not the sweet, herbal scent of GRU, but a sharp, resinous, almost tangy aroma. The finished product is strange. It's bitter in a way you're not used to. The familiar, complex flavors of your herbs are gone, replaced by a clean, bracing bitterness and a floral, citrusy aftertaste. Here's a curious, little known fact about this transition. The early resistance to hops wasn't just about tradition. There were organized campaigns against them. In some English towns, the authorities, sometimes spurred on by local GIU-sale brewers, actually banned the use of hops, declaring them a wicked and pernicious weed that was tainting the quality of good. On the stale, there were also health concerns. Some believed that hopped beer was unhealthy, that it would cause melancholy or other ailments, unlike the familiar, medicinal GIU herbs. You give a mug of your new hopped beer to a regular customer. He wrinkles his nose at first. It's bitter, he says, surprised, but then he takes another sip. He finds that the bitterness is clean, and it makes him want to take another drink. It's different, but not necessarily bad. You notice that this batch, stored in a cask, stays fresh for a remarkably long time. A week passes, then two, and it still tastes clean, with no hint of the sourness that usually begins to creep in. You can see the appeal. The economic advantage is undeniable. This technological shift, however, brings up a crucial historical debate. Did the introduction of hops directly lead to the decline of female brewers? Many historians argue yes, for several reasons. First, it shifted brewing from a business based on local, foraged ingredients GIU to one based on a cultivated, traded commodity hops, favoring those with access to cash and trade networks, who were more often men. Second, the preservative qualities of hops allowed for the centralization of production, instead of many small, home-based brewers making perishable ale for their immediate neighborhood. It became possible for a few larger, commercial breweries to produce durable beer for an entire town or region. These large operations required more space, more equipment, and more capital, pushing them out of the domestic kitchen and into purpose-built brewhouses, a domain that men were beginning to control. The very nature of the work started to change. It was becoming less like cooking, and more like a large scale industrial process. You stand in your small home, looking at the cask of hopped beer. It represents an opportunity, a way to make a more stable, reliable product, but it also represents a threat. It's the sound of a future that has less space for you, the small scale, independent alewife. For now, you exist in a world of choice. You can continue to make your traditional GIU ale, relying on your secret recipe and loyal customers, or you can start to incorporate this new, bitter flower, adapting to the changing tastes and the new economics of your craft. The choice you and thousands of women like you make will shape the future of brewing for centuries to come. The arrival of hops was like a seed planted, a quiet harbinger of a much larger change. For now, your GIU ale remains popular with the locals who appreciate its familiar taste, but the new, durable beer made with hops is gaining a foothold, especially with travelers, dens, and anyone who needs to store ale for more than a few days. You notice that the larger taverns in the nearby market town are increasingly selling this new hopped beer, and with this shift, you begin to see another, more troubling development: the rise of the men's brewing guilds. For generations, your craft was informal, learned at your mother's side, and regulated only by the village ale minus taster. But as brewing becomes more commercial and more profitable, thanks in large part to the scalability that hops allow, men begin to take a much more serious interest in it. In towns and cities across Europe, they start to organize. They form professional associations, or guilds, to control the trade. This is a critical moment in the history of labor and gender, the formalization of a previously female-dominated craft into a male-controlled profession. You first experience this not as a formal decree, but as a subtle shift in the social landscape. You might go to the market town to sell a few casks of your best ale, something you've done for years. But now, you find you're met with new regulations. You might be told you can't sell directly to the public in the main square anymore. That space is reserved for members of the newly formed Brewers Guild. To sell your ale, you have to go through them, and they, of course, will take a cut of your profits. The guilds presented themselves as organizations dedicated to upholding quality. They established strict rules about ingredients, brewing processes, and pricing. They created apprenticeships, formalizing the training process over many years, a system that was inherently designed for young men who could leave home to live and work with the master, not for women who were also raising families and running households. Here's a small but significant detail about how these guilds consolidated power. They used their collective influence to lobby local authorities for favorable laws. They would petition the town council for a charter that gave them an official monopoly on the production and sale of beer within the town walls. This charter might explicitly state that only guild members were permitted to brew for commercial sale, and the membership of these guilds, almost exclusively male, while a brewer's widow might sometimes be allowed to continue her husband's business. It was a rare exception. Unmarried or married women operating on their own, like you, were systematically excluded. You see the effect on women like you. A friend in the market town, who used to run a thriving ale-house from her home, is now struggling. The guild has made it nearly impossible for her to compete. They can buy grain and hops in bulk at a lower price. They have the capital to build larger brew houses with bigger cauldrons and more fermentation vats, and they have the law on their side. She is being slowly, methodically, pushed out of the business her family has been in for a century. This process of masculinization of the brewing trade is a major topic for social and economic historians. The debate isn't about if it happened. The evidence is overwhelming that it did. The debate is about why. Was it a conscious, misogynistic conspiracy by men to take over a profitable industry from women? Or was it an unintended, but devastating, consequence of broader economic changes? The conspiracy argument points to guild regulations that seemed specifically designed to exclude women. The consequence argument suggests that as brewing scaled up and moved out of the home into a more industrial setting, it naturally fell into the male-dominated public sphere of commerce, leaving women behind in the domestic sphere. The truth is likely a messy combination of both. The men organizing the guilds probably weren't thinking let's put the women out of business. They were likely thinking let's protect our livelihoods and control our trade. But the system they built to do so had the practical effect of excluding their female competitors. You are insulated from the worst of this. For now, in your small village, the guild's power is concentrated in the larger towns and cities. Here, life is still governed by the old ways, by personal relationships and informal economies. Your neighbor still buys from you because he likes your GRU ale, not because a guild tells him to, but you can feel the winds of change blowing from the towns. You hear stories, you see the worried look on your friend's face. The men in your own village start talking differently about brewing. It's no longer just women's work. It's now seen as a potential trade, a mystery in the medieval sense of a skilled craft. A young man who might have become a carpenter or a smith now talks of going to the city to become an apprentice brewer. The very idea would have been laughable a generation ago. You stand at your door, looking out at the familiar village scene. Your L- stake is a symbol of an older world, a world of domestic enterprise, of female industry. The Guildhall being built in the nearby town is a symbol of a new world, one of professional associations, formal capital, and male control. You don't know it yet, but you are witnessing the beginning of the end of the era of the alewife. The quiet, home-based business that has empowered women for centuries is slowly being redefined, regulated, and taken away. The influence of the guilds, once a distant rumble from the city, begins to creep into your village life. It arrives not with a formal declaration, but in the form of new rules and expectations, often brought back by the reeve or other officials who have dealings with the town. The old, informal system is slowly being chipped away, replaced by a more rigid, codified world. You are forced to adapt, to navigate a landscape where the rules you've always known are changing under your feet. One of the first changes you notice is in the area of supply. The new guilds in the town have started to control the bulk purchasing of barley. They have contracts with the big manazan merchants, which means they get the best quality grain at the best prices. Suddenly, the grain available to you at the local market is of a lesser quality, or more expensive. Your profit margins, already slim, are squeezed even further. To make the same quality of ale, you now have to spend more, while the guild brewers in town are lowering their costs. It's a subtle but powerful economic pressure. Then come the new regulations about equipment. The guilds, under the guise of quality control, start to dictate the types of materials and vessels that are acceptable for commercial brewing. They might push for the use of more expensive copper kettles, instead of the traditional iron cauldron, arguing they are easier to clean and provide a more even heat. They might set standards for the type of wood used in fermentation barrels. Your family's earthen cauldron, which has served generations, is now deemed old-fashioned and unhygienic by these new standards. You can't afford a new copper kettle, so you are immediately at a disadvantage. Your methods framed as inferior. This is a classic historical pattern, a dominant group using standards and regulations as a tool to exclude competitors who lack the capital to comply. It's not that your iron cauldron can make good ale, it has done so for a century. It's that the rules are being rewritten by those who can afford the new technology, effectively making the old ways obsolete by decree. You have to find ways to continue your craft within this new, more restrictive environment. You focus on what makes you unique. Since you can't compete on price or scale, you must compete on niche appeal. You lean into your identity as a traditional GRU ale brewer. While the town breweries are all churning out the same fashionable, hopped beer, you become the keeper of an old flavor. You market your ale as the true ale, the kind people's grandfathers drank. It's a strategy born of necessity, turning your inability to conform into a virtue. Here's a peculiar detail about this period of transition. The clash of old and new technologies created some strange hybrid practices. For instance, some brewers, unable to afford hops in large quantities but wanting some of their preservative benefits, would add just a small amount of hops to their traditional GRU recipe. The result would have been a strange tasting brew, a muddle of variable, floral GRU flavors with the sharp bitterness of hops. It was a transitional beverage, a taste of a world caught between two traditions. You might even try this yourself, hoping to extend the life of your ale by a few days without losing its traditional character entirely. The pressure from the guilds also changes the social dynamic of your work. The informal, supportive network of your fellow alewives begins to fray. Before, you and good wife Agnes were friendly rivals. Now, with the external pressure mounting, that rivalry can feel more desperate. There's less room for multiple small brewers to thrive. The struggle for the remaining pool of customers becomes more intense. The sense of a shared female enterprise is slowly eroded, replaced by a more individualistic struggle for survival. This leads to a fascinating, if poignant, historical debate. Did women brewers try to organize and resist? Did they form their own anti-minus guilds? The historical record is largely silent on this, which has led to different interpretations. Some historians argue that the silence is the answer: women, being largely excluded from formal political and legal structures, lacked the means and opportunity to organize in the same way men did. Their power was informal and home-based, which made collective action on a large scale nearly impossible. Other historians, however, believe that resistance did happen, but it wasn't recorded in the official documents written by men. It might have taken the form of quiet boycotts of guild miners-approved taverns, the continuation of illicit home brewing and selling, or the deliberate spreading of rumors to slander the quality of guild miners-produced beer. It was a subtle, guerrilla miner-style resistance, fought on the front lines of the village gossip network rather than in the guild hall. You find yourself practicing this quiet resistance. You continue to use your mother's cauldron. You continue to perfect your GRU recipe. You maintain your personal relationships with your customers, reminding them that you offer something the faceless town breweries cannot: a personal touch, a taste of tradition, and a direct connection to the person who made their drink. You are no longer just a brewer. You are a curator of a dying art, a living link to a past that is being systematically dismantled. You stand by your old methods, not just out of stubbornness, but as an act of defiance, a quiet insistence that the old ways still have value in a world rushing to embrace the new. In this new, more competitive world, with the formal, branded beers from the town guilds gaining prominence, a question becomes more urgent than ever: what is your trademark? In an age without graphic designers, logos, or advertising budgets, your reputation is your brand. But how do you visually signify that? How does a customer know, from a distance, that the ale being sold from a particular house is yours, the good stuff, and not your less talented neighbors? The ale stake itself was the generic sign for ale for sale, but clever brewers developed ways to make their stakes distinctive. This was the birth of the pub sign. Instead of just a simple pole or a bundle of twigs, you might start hanging a specific, recognizable object from your ale stake. This object becomes your visual trademark, a simple, non-verbal logo. This practice is a well-documented and charming piece of history, the very origin of the elaborate signs we see on pubs today. Your family, for instance, might be known for your particularly strong, warming ale, perfect for a cold day. So, you might hang a woolen glove or a knitted cap from your state. Another family, perhaps living near the river, might hang a small, carved wooden fish. Someone named Bell might hang an actual bell. These simple, associative symbols, the glove, the fish, the bell, became the first pub names. They were practical, memorable, and easily understood by a largely illiterate population. You decide you need a more distinctive sign. Your ale is known for its rich, slightly reddish hue, a result of using a specific type of malted barley. So you decide to hang a simple, red-dyed cloth from your stake. It's not a flag or a banner, just a piece of red fabric that flutters in the breeze. Soon, people in the village and travelers passing through learn to look for the red cloth. It becomes your unique identifier. Are you heading to the red cloth for a pint? Someone might ask, and everyone would know they meant your house. Here's a delightful and quirky detail related to this practice. The symbols weren't always so literal. Sometimes they were based on heraldry or local legends. A brewer operating on land owned by a lord whose coat of arms featured a lion might hang a sign with a lion on it, the Red Lion, a hugely common pub name in England. This was both a sign of respect to the landlord and a way to borrow a bit of his authority and recognition. Some signs were based on puns or rebuses. A sign with a hair and a bottle might signify that the owner's name was Hair Bottle. This visual wit was a form of sophisticated, pre-literate marketing. Your red cloth works well. It sets you apart, but your true trademark, the one that can't be so easily copied, is the taste of the ale itself. In a world without chemistry, achieving a consistent flavor profile is an art form. It is your most valuable trade secret. You know instinctively how to adjust for a slightly damper batch of grain by letting it steep a little longer. You can tell by the smell of the steam during the boil whether you need to add a few more herbs to balance the sweetness. This is your intellectual property, and you guard it fiercely. This brings us to a historical debate that still engages food historians how much of the unique flavor of a particular medieval ale came from the recipe, and how much came from the house microbes. The traditional view is that the brewer's skill and the G/U recipe were paramount, but a more modern, scientific view suggests that the most unique and unminus-copyable element of your ale was your family's specific yeast strain, which lived on your barn-thickened in the very wood of your fermentation barrels. This colony of yeast and bacteria was a living heirloom, a microbial fingerprint. A rival could steal your herb blend, use the same water and grain, but they could never perfectly replicate your yeast. They couldn't steal your terroir. Your ale tasted like your house. This might be why a lucky brewing paddle or a specific barrel was so highly prized. People understood on some level that the object itself contributed to the final flavor. So you have your visual trademark, the red cloth, and your flavor trademark, your unique G/U and yeast. This combination is your shield against the encroaching, homogenized world of the guilds. They can produce beer cheaply and in great quantities, but it all tastes more or less the same. You offer something they cannot character. People seek you out for this character. A local landowner, planning his daughter's wedding, doesn't go to the town guild for the generic beer. He comes to you. He wants your special, traditional G/U ale for the feast because it tastes of home, of celebration, of something real. This kind of commission is a huge honor and a vital part of your business. It reinforces your status as an artisan, not just a producer. You are not just selling a beverage. You are selling nostalgia, tradition, and a unique identity, all signified by a simple piece of red cloth tied to a pole. The commission for the wedding is a great honor, but it also means you need to brew something special. Everyday small ale is fine for quenching thirst after a day in the fields, but the celebration calls for something more potent, more flavorful, and more memorable. This is your chance to showcase your true artistry by brewing a strong ale or a festival ale. This practice of brewing different grades of ale for different occasions was a fundamental part of the medieval brewer's repertoire. The process for making a strong ale starts with the same ingredients, but uses them in a different ratio. You use significantly more barley for the amount of water. This creates a much richer, more concentrated wort, packed with sugars. The resulting ale will have a higher alcohol content and a fuller, sweeter, maltier body. It's the difference between a simple table wine and a rich, complex vintage. This type of brewing, however, is a much riskier and more expensive endeavor. You are using a large quantity of your precious grain in a single batch. If something goes wrong, if it's hours, or the fermentation stalls, the financial loss is much greater. This is a high-stakes brew, and you watch over it with even more care than usual. As the wort boils, you'll also adjust your G/U. For a festival ale, you might add more of the expensive, celebratory spices, a pinch of ginger for a few cloves for a festive aroma, maybe even a touch of honey to add to the richness and boost the alcohol content. This is your top-shelf product, the best you can possibly make. A fascinating and slightly strange technique used to create these strong ales was the party-jar system. A brewer would start with a very dense mash, using a lot of grain. They would draw off the first, most sugary runnings of wort from this mash. This first wort was incredibly rich and would be used to make the high-quality strong ale. Then, they would pour more water over the same grains and the mash to extract the remaining, less-concentrated sugars. This second wort or second runnings would be used to make the weaker, everyday small ale. It was an incredibly efficient system. From one batch of grain, you could produce two entirely different products, a high-N strong ale for special occasions and a low-N table ale for daily consumption. Nothing was wasted. The fermentation for a strong ale is also different. It's often more violent and takes longer. The yeast, feasting on the abundance of sugar, works furiously, producing more alcohol and a deep, complex range of flavors. You have to watch it carefully, ensuring the temperature doesn't get too high, which could kill the yeast or produce off-minus flavors. The ale you brew for this wedding is a masterpiece. It's dull, rich, and warming, with a complex aroma of herbs, spice, and malt. When the wedding day arrives, Your ale is a centerpiece of the feast. Served with pride, the guest praise its quality, and the landowner pays you handsomely a significant boost to your family's income for the year. This success cements your reputation as the village's foremost artisan brewer. This practice of seasonal and festival brewing brings up an interesting debate among historians about the medieval diet and calendar. Was the calendar simply a religious and agricultural cycle? Or was it also a flavor calendar? Some argue that the year was marked by a distinct series of tastes and smells. The dark, spicy, strong ales of Christmas, sometimes called a winter warmer or washed ale, tasted completely different from the lighter, perhaps more floral, ales brewed for Easter or May Day. These special brews weren't just drinks. They were an integral part of the sensory experience of the holiday. As important as the specific foods that were eaten, they marked the passage of time in a tangible, drinkable form. You practice this flavor minus space timekeeping. You know that as the weather turns cold and the nights drawing, your customers will start asking for darker, malty rails. In the spring, they'll want something lighter and more refreshing. You adjust your brewing schedule and your recipes to match the rhythm of the seasons, the church calendar, and the agricultural year. The strong ale from the wedding is a triumph, but it also serves as a reminder of the growing gap in the market. The town guilds are focusing on producing a standardized, mid-minus strength hot beer for mass consumption. They are masters of the middle ground. Your survival depends on mastering the extremes: the cheap, quickly minus made small ale for the local laborers, and the high minus end, artisanal strong ale for special occasions. You are becoming a specialist, a boutique producer, not because you want to, but because the middle of the market is being taken from you. As you clean your cauldron after the festival brew, you look at the few remaining jugs of the strong ale you set aside for your own family. It's more than just a drink. It's a symbol of your skill, your heritage, and your ability to create something truly special. In a world that is beginning to favor quantity over quality, you are the guardian of a different standard, one measured not in gallons but in the smiles and praise of a wedding party. The handsome payment you received for the wedding ale isn't just a pile of coins to be admired. It's a vital injection into your family's fragile economy. You sit down with your husband by the hearth, perhaps with a tally stick or a piece of slate, and you plan. This money represents security, opportunity, and a small measure of control over your future. The income from your brewing is not extra money or a hobby income. It is a central pillar of your household's finances, and its impact is felt in every aspect of your life. This is a key historical point that is often underestimated: the economic power wielded by alewives. Through their brewing, women contributed directly and substantially to the household budget, in a way that was visible and quantifiable. This wasn't just hidden domestic labor. It was a commercial enterprise with tangible profits. With the coins from the wedding feast, you first set aside a portion to pay the tithe to the church and the fees owed to the lord of the manor. These are non-minus negotiable. Next, you plan for the necessities. A portion of the money is immediately earmarked for buying a piglet at the next market. A pig is a crucial family asset, a walking larder that can be fattened up on household scraps, including the spent grain from your brewing, and will provide meat to see you through the winter. This is a direct conversion of your brewing skill into food security. Another portion is set aside for repairs. The thatch on your roof has a leak in the corner, a constant source of damp and worry. Now, you can afford to pay the local thatcher for a day's work and a bundle of fresh reeds. You can also afford to replace your husband's worn minus-out leather shoes. Significant expense. These aren't luxuries. They're essential investments in your family's health and well-being, all funded by your ale. Perhaps the most significant use of the money is for the future. You might use some of it to secure a small plot of land to lease, giving you more space for your kitchen garden, or allowing you to grow a small amount of your own barley, reducing your reliance on the market. Or, most importantly, you might invest it in your children. A small sum could be used to pay the fee for your son to be apprenticed to a skilled craftsman, like the weaver or the carpenter, setting him on a path to a secure trade. In a world with very little social mobility, Your brewing income could be the crucial lever that gives your children a better life than you had. Here's a curious detail that tax records and court documents reveal alewives were often specifically targeted for fines and taxes. While this seems punitive, it's also a backhanded testament to their success. The authorities, both secular and religious, knew that these women were generating income, and they wanted their share. The records of fines paid by alewives for various infractions, selling after hours, breaking their size, etc., show that they were active and visible players in the local economy. They were business owners, and they were treated as such by the taxman. The accounting of all this is meticulous, even if it doesn't involve spreadsheets. You know to the last farthing how much a batch of ale costs to make and how much profit you can expect. You mentally balance the cost of barley against the potential earnings, the price of firewood against the number of jugs you sell. You are the household CFO, managing inventory, production costs, and revenue, all from the corner of your small, smoky cottage. This reality of the alewife as an economic agent is central to a long-running debate among feminist historians. Did this economic contribution translate into greater social power and equality within the marriage and the community? The evidence is complex. On one hand, a woman who brought in a significant, independent income likely had more say in household decisions than one who did not. Her husband would have respected her skill and business acumen. Her economic contribution was undeniable. On the other hand, society at large was still deeply patriarchal. The law viewed her as subordinate to her husband. Her property, in many legal systems, technically belonged to him, so her power was likely unnegotiated. Domestic power, rather than a formal, public one. She might have controlled the household budget, but she couldn't vote in the village council. She could fund her son's future, but she couldn't own land in her own name. You finish your financial planning. The piglet will be bought, the roof will be mended, and a few coins will be carefully wrapped in a cloth and hidden away. A small emergency fund. You look at your hands, stained from the herbs and grain, and at the great cauldron, now clean and waiting for the next brew. They are not just the tools of a trade. They are the instruments of your family's survival and its hopes for the future. Every jug of ale you sell is a small step towards a more secure life, a testament to the quiet, powerful alchemy of turning barley into opportunity. The years pass in the familiar cycles of seasons and brewing. Your children are growing, your business is stable, and you have carved out a respected place for yourself in the village. Life is hard, but it is predictable. Then, a new kind of fear arrives, a fear unlike any other. It comes not as a rumor of war or a bad harvest, but as a whispered story from a traveler, a story of a horrifying, unstoppable sickness in the east. Soon, the whispers become terrified reports. The great pestilence, the Black Death, has arrived in Europe, and it is moving. The arrival of the plague in the mid-14th century was an apocalyptic event that fundamentally reshaped the medieval world. For you, it begins as a growing trade. You hear of entire towns being wiped out. You see the fear in your neighbor's eyes. Trade slows down. Fewer travelers pass through the village. The world outside seems to be holding its breath. And then it comes to your village. It starts with one family, then another. They fever, painful swellings, and then, with terrifying speed, death. The familiar social fabric of your community disintegrates. People bar their doors, terrified of their own neighbors. The communal activities that defined your life, gathering at the well, attending church, sharing a jug of ale in your home, become sources of mortal danger. Your ale miner's house, once a hub of connection, falls silent. No one wants to gather in a crowded room anymore. You do what you can to protect your family. You stop all public sales of ale. You might rely on folk remedies, hanging pouches of strong smelling herbs like lavender or rosemary around your neck, hoping the scent will ward off the bad air or miasma that people believed caused the disease. This belief in miasma, that disease was spread by foul odors, is a key historical point. While incorrect, it did lead to some incidentally hygienic practices. like cleaning streets and burning aromatic woods. Here's a small, heartbreaking detail of life during the plague: the abandonment of the sick. Fear of contagion was so overwhelming that it shattered even the strongest family bonds. People would leave their sick relatives to die alone, refusing to enter their homes. The social order, built on mutual support, collapsed under the weight of sheer terror. You pray that the sickness passes over your house, knowing that if it strikes, you will likely face it alone. Every day you wake up and listen, not for the sound of the village waking up, but for the sound of the death minus cart creaking down the lane, or the tolling of the church bell for another soul. The smell of death hangs in the air, a constant, grim reminder of your own mortality. Historians have long debated the true mortality rate of the Black Death, but the consensus is that it was catastrophic, killing anywhere from 30% to 60% of Europe's population. It's almost impossible to imagine the psychological impact of such a loss. You would have seen your friends, your neighbors, the people you shared your life with, disappear in a matter of weeks. The village would be full of empty houses, their former inhabitants buried in mass plague pits because there was no one left to dig individual graves. Miraculously, your immediate family is spared. You survive. But the world you emerge into is entirely different. It's quieter, emptier. The faces you see are a fraction of what they were. Your village has been hollowed out. The social and economic landscape is irrevocably altered. The lord of the manor is gone. The reeve is gone. John the Thatcher and William the Carter are gone. Good wife Agnes, your friendly rival, has vanished from her home. You stand in the doorway of your silent house, looking out at a world reborn in trauma. The familiar web of relationships that defined your life has been torn to shreds. The customers who knew your ale, the neighbors who supported your business, the baker you shared yeast with, many are gone forever. The old world, with its predictable rhythms and its intricate social rules, died with them. The plague was a biological event, but its consequences were economic, social, and psychological. For you, the Brewster, it is a moment of profound uncertainty. Who will you sell your ale to now? How will the village ever recover? The immediate threat of the disease may have passed, that the long, slow work of rebuilding a shattered world is just beginning. You are a survivor, that you are a survivor in a graveyard, and the future is a terrifying, empty slate. The familiar scent of molten yeast, once a smell of comfort and commerce, now feels like a relic from another lifetime. In the eerie quiet after the plague has passed, a new and unexpected reality begins to set in. So many people have died: farmers, laborers, craftsmen, that there is now a severe shortage of workers. For the first time in living memory, labor is a scarce and valuable commodity. This is one of the most significant and well-minus documented consequences of the Black Death, a radical rebalancing of the economic scales between the land miners owning elite and the working peasantry. For you, this new reality manifests in several ways. The surviving farm laborers, now in high demand, can command much higher wages. They are no longer tied to the land in the same way. If one lord won't pay them what they want, they can simply leave and find another who will. This newfound economic power among the working class means they have more disposable income. And what do they spend it on? The simple, affordable luxuries of life: better food, better clothes, and better ale. Suddenly, the demand for your ale, after the dreadful silence of the plague years, begins to return, and it's stronger than before. The survivors, both haunted by what they've endured and emboldened by their new economic standing, have a thirst for life and for good ale. Your small business, which seemed on the verge of extinction, finds itself in a surprisingly robust market. You put out your ale miner's stake once more, and the customers who come are willing to pay a better price for a quality product. However, this new economic landscape cuts both ways. While your customers have more money, your own costs are also rising. The price of barley shoots up, as there are fewer hands to plant and harvest it. The cost of firewood, barrels, and everything else you need for your craft increases as well. You are caught in an inflationary spiral, a key feature of the post-miners plague economy. You have to be a more astute business person than ever. carefully balancing your rising costs with the new pricing your customers can bear. Here's a peculiar and telling detail from this era: the some PTU laws. As the lower classes began to earn more and started dressing in finer clothes and eating more expensive food, things previously reserved for the nobility, the ruling class became deeply anxious. They felt the traditional social order was being undermined. In response, governments enacted some PTU laws, which dictated what people of different classes were allowed to wear and consume. A farmer might be legally forbidden from wearing silk, or a merchant from wearing certain types of fur. These laws were a desperate attempt by the elite to maintain visible class distinctions in a world where economic lines were becoming blurred. While these laws didn't usually apply to ale, they are a sign of the immense social anxiety that you, in your small way, are benefiting from. Your role as an alewife also takes on a new social importance. With so many families shattered and communities broken, the alehouse, your home, becomes a vital center for rebuilding social bonds. It's a place where the survivors can gather, share stories of who they lost and who is left, and begin to piece together a new sense of community. Your role as a host and facilitator, always important, is now essential. You are not just serving ale, you are helping to heal a traumatized society, one conversation at a time. This new economic reality for the working class has been a major point of debate for historians. Was the post-plague era a golden age for the English laborer? Some historians argue that, for a few generations, it was. With high wages and low and rent, so many farms were abandoned. The standard of living for the average person improved dramatically. They ate more meat, drank more ale, and had a degree of economic freedom their ancestors could only have dreamed of. Other historians are more cautious. They argue that this golden age was short-lived and that the elite quickly found new ways to suppress wages and reassert control, such as the Statute of Laborers, which attempted mostly unsuccessfully to freeze wages at pre-plague levels. You experience this golden age on a small, personal scale. You are able to afford better food for your family. You can finally buy that small plot of land you dreamed of, not just lease it, because its previous owner died without heirs, and land is now cheap. Your business is thriving in a way that would have been unimaginable before the plague. But there's a dark side to this prosperity. It's a prosperity built on the graves of your friends and neighbors. You look around at the new faces in your alehouse, many of the newcomers who have moved into the village to take over abandoned land, and you feel a pang of loss for the old, familiar community. The world is better for you, personally, in a material sense, but the cost was unthinkable. This strange paradox, a personal boom born from a collective catastrophe, is the defining feature of your life as a survivor. You pour another jug of your finest ale, your hand steady, your heart heavy with the memory of the world that had to be lost for this new one to be born. Your business is thriving in the post-plague world. You are respected, if aging, figure in your rebuilt community. Your children are grown, perhaps with children of their own, and your life has a measure of security you never thought possible. But as the 14th century draws to a close and the 15th begins, you start to notice a subtle but disturbing shift in how people like you, the alewives, are portrayed in the wider culture. The respect you command in your own village is not reflected in the stories and poems that begin to circulate from the cities and the courts. You might hear a traveling minstrel or a literate merchant recite a passage from a new poem by a popular London author named Geoffrey Chaucer in his famous collection of stories, The Canterbury Tales. There are vivid descriptions of brewers. The cook in the story is a master of his craft, but he has an oozing sore on his leg, and his food is implicitly contaminated. More pointedly, in the Summoner's Tale, the alehouses are depicted as dens of sin and corruption. While Chaucer doesn't feature a full-blown alewife character as a pilgrim, the alehouse landladies who appear in the background are often portrayed as greedy, dishonest, and complicit in shady dealings. This is a significant cultural moment, the beginning of the alewife's transformation from a respected community figure into a negative stereotype. You see the stereotype taking root in popular songs and morality plays. The alewife is no longer the hard-working domestic producer. She is becoming a caricature of fat, red-faced, greedy woman who cheats her customers with short measures, waters down her ale, and overcharges for a substandard product. She is often depicted as shrewish and domineering, ruling over her henpecked husband. This image is a stark contrast to the reality of your life, the hard work, the constant risk, the careful management of your household economy. Why did this change happen? It's a question that cultural historians have spent a lot of time debating. One theory is that it was a direct result of the growing power of the male-dominated brewing guilds. As the guilds sought to professionalize and control the trade, they had a vested interest in discrediting their main competitors, the thousands of independent female brewers. By creating and promoting a negative stereotype of the alewife, they could frame their own guild-regulated beer as a safer, more honest, and superior product. It was, in essence, a medieval smear campaign. Another theory connects it to broader anxieties about women's roles in the post-plague world, with women inheriting property and businesses at an unprecedented rate and participating more visibly in the economy. There was a backlash from a patriarchal society that felt its traditional hierarchies were under threat. The greedy, domineering alewife stereotype was a way to mock and belittle economically independent women, to put them back in their place. Here's a particularly bizarre and specific detail from this tradition of slander: the demon and the tankard. In some religious art and manuscripts from the period, you can see illustrations of little demons, named Tutuvilis or other such infernal names, sitting on the shoulders of gossiping women in church or, tellingly, hiding in the foam of a jug of ale. The idea was that the alehouse was a place of idle chatter, sin, and temptation, and the alewife was the gatekeeper to this damnation. Some stories even depicted the alewife being dragged to hell by demons, her punishment for serving weak ale and using false measures. You feel the sting of this changing reputation personally. A joke is told at your expense. A song is sung that paints you in an unflattering light, while your direct neighbors still respect you for who you are. The cultural water is being poisoned. The term alewife itself, once a simple descriptor of your profession, starts to take on a slightly derogatory, comical connotation. It is deeply unfair. You have spent your life providing a vital service, acting as a community help, and supporting your family through skill and hard work. Now, the very work that defines you is being used as a punchline. This growing negative image is another force, alongside the guilt and the rise of hops, that contributes to the slow decline of your profession. It's an erosion of social capital, a chipping away at the respect and authority that allowed women to thrive in this trade for centuries. You are too old to change your ways now. You continue to brew your honest GRU at ale, to give fair measures, and to run a welcoming house. But you worry for your daughter, to whom you are teaching the craft. The world she will inherit as a brewster will be a more hostile one. A world where she will not only have to fight for her market share but also against a rising tide of cultural prejudice. The golden age of the alewife is fading, not just into economic history, but into a caricature of her own making, denned by men who sought to control her trade and define her legacy. As you get older, you sometimes reflect on the simple economics of your life. You've spent decades turning grain into ale, and ale into a livelihood. But what was a jug of your ale actually worth in the grand scheme of things? The price, set by the assize of bread and ale and your own assessment of its strength, was typically around a penny for a gallon of strong ale, and perhaps half that for common small ale. But what could that penny actually buy? Understanding this gives you a real, tangible sense of your place in the medieval economy. This is a core concept in economic history: understanding purchasing power. A penny was not a small, insignificant coin like it is today. It was a silver coin, and it represented a significant unit of value for the common person, the daily wage for a skilled craftsman, like a carpenter or a mason, in the late 14th century, was around 3-4 pence a day. An unskilled agricultural laborer might earn 1 or 2 pence. So a gallon of your best ale for quarts, or about 8 modern pints, cost a laborer roughly half of his entire day's wages. This wasn't a casual, trivial purchase. It was a significant treat, which is why small ale was the more common daily drink. Let's put that penny into perspective with other common goods. With the penny you earned from selling a gallon of ale, you could go to the market and buy a whole chicken, or you could buy 2 dozen eggs. You could purchase a pound of cheese, or enough candles to give you light for several evenings. A pair of simple leather shoes might cost around 6 pence, so the sale of 6 gallons of your best ale could shod your husband's feet. This shows that your ale was a valuable commodity, not just a simple beverage. Each batch you brewed represented real, convertible wealth that could be directly translated into the necessities of life. Here's a strange and specific detail that highlights the value of ale in some manorial accounts. Ale was listed as part of a worker's wages. During the harvest, a lord might be contractually obligated to provide his laborers not just with a cash wage, but also with a certain quantity of food and of gallons of ale per day. This was called wet rent or a drink allowance. Ale wasn't just something they bought with their wages. It was part of their wages. This tells you how essential it was considered, not just as a source of refreshment, but as a vital source of calories and hydration to fuel a day of hard physical labor. When you sold your ale, you were selling liquid energy. This question of value and pricing brings us to an ongoing academic debate: how strictly was the size of bread and ale actually enforced, especially in small, rural villages like yours. The law was clear, but the reality on the ground was likely much messier. Some historians, looking at the official court records, argue that enforcement was relatively strict and that alewives were regularly fined for overcharging. This suggests a top-minus regulated economy. Other historians argue that in practice, especially far from the eyes of major officials, the price of ale was much more negotiable and based on a complex system of barter, credit, and personal relationships. You might sell a gallon of ale to your regular neighbor for the official price of a penny, but you might charge a wealthy traveler a penny and a half. Or you might trade that same gallon to the blacksmith for a mended tool, a transaction whose price is based entirely on your mutual assessment of need and value. The value of your ale also changed with the seasons. Just before the harvest, when last year's grain stores were running low, the price of barley would be at its peak. This meant your production costs were high, and you had to charge more for your ale. After the harvest, when grain was plentiful and cheap, the price would drop. You lived in a constant state of flux, your fortunes tied directly to the agricultural calendar. Looking back, you can see your life as a series of conversions. You converted the sun and rain, captured in a field of barley, into a sack of grain. You converted that grain, through your labor and skill, into a barrel of ale, and you converted that ale into everything else your family needed: a mended roof, a new piglet, a warm coat, a future for your children. You weren't just an alewife, you were an alchemist of the everyday, turning the humble gifts of the earth into the substance of a life. The clink of a silver penny in your palm after selling a full jug was the sound of that magic succeeding, a quiet affirmation of your value in a world that was constantly trying to define it for you. You are older now, your movements are slower, and the heavy work of brewing hauling water, lifting sacks of grain, stirring the thick mash takes a greater toll on your body. You rely more on your daughter, who now has the strong arms and keen instincts that you once did. As you watch her work, you are struck not just by the continuity of your family's tradition, but also by the subtle and not subtle changes in the tools and technologies around you. The world of brewing is slowly modernizing, and your small, domestic operation is starting to feel like a relic. The most significant changes are in scale. In the nearby town, the Brewers Guild has built a new, purpose-built brew house. It's not part of a home, it's a dedicated industrial building. Instead of a single iron cauldron hanging over a hearth, they have a massive, fixed copper kettle set into a brick furnace that allows for much better heat control. It can produce more wort in a single boiling than you could produce in a week. This is a fundamental technological leap, moving brewing from the kitchen to the factory floor. With these larger kettles come larger fermentation vessels. Your family has always used wooden barrels, perhaps holding 50 or 60 gallons. The new commercial breweries are using enormous wooden vats, cold tuns, that can hold hundreds, even thousands of gallons. Managing a fermentation on this scale is a different science. It requires a deeper understanding of temperature and timing, and often a team of men to manage. This shift to larger scale equipment presents you with an impossible challenge. You cannot compete with this level of production. Your business model is based on small, frequent batches sold quickly. This is based on mass production of a more stable, hop beer that can be stored and sold over a wider area. The very definition of a brewery is changing from a room in a house to a dedicated industrial site. Here is a small but telling innovation that makes a huge difference: the thermometer. While not yet common in your small village, you hear that some of the most advanced brewers in the city are beginning to use these strange glass instruments to measure the temperature of their mash and wort. For you, temperature has always been a matter of feel the steam on your face, a finger dipped in the liquid. It's an art. For them, it is becoming a science, a matter of precise, repeatable numbers. This allows them to produce a much more consistent product. Batch after batch, the art and mystery of your craft are being replaced by chemistry and engineering. Another challenge comes from an unexpected source: the availability of water. Your village has always relied on the communal well, but the new, large scale breweries require vast amounts of water. They are often built near rivers or have their own dedicated well stock, giving them access to a constant, reliable supply that you lack. In a dry summer, when your village well is running low, you might have to stop brewing altogether. The Geld Brewery, with its superior infrastructure, can continue production unabated. This growing technological gap is the subject of a historical debate about the nature of innovation. Did these new technologies kill the alework, or were they simply a symptom of a broader economic shift that was already marginalizing female brewers? One side argues that technology was the primary driver. The new hardware, the big kettles, the thermometers, created an industry where the small scale domestic producer simply couldn't compete. And because of social and capital constraints, these producers were almost always women. The other side argues that the technology was adopted because the trade was already being taken over by male dominated guilds. The guilds had the capital and the commercial ambition to invest in these innovations, while the independent alewives did not. The technology, in this view, wasn't the cause of the shift, but a tool used to accelerate. You feel this technological gap as a widening chasm between your world and the world of the town. You watch your daughter using the same bar stick your mother gave you, stirring the mash in the same iron cauldron, relying on the same inherited knowledge of touch and smell. There is a beauty and an integrity to it, but you also know it is a dying art. It's like being the scribe who writes beautiful manuscripts by hand in a world that is just beginning to learn about the printing press. Your customers, the old timers and the traditionalists, still value what you do. They come for the taste of your G-R-U-at ale, a flavor that is rapidly disappearing. They come for the connection to a person, not a faceless company. But you know that when these customers are gone, their children, raised on the standardized, hopped beer from the town, will likely not return. Your small business is sustained by loyalty and nostalgia, but nostalgia is a fragile foundation against the relentless tide of progress. The red cloth you hang from your ale steak has become faded over the years, bleached by the sun and frayed by the wind. It has seen seasons of success and seasons of struggle. Now, as you stand in your doorway, an old woman looking out at a village that is both the same and completely different from the one you were born in. The steak itself feels like a symbol of a bygone era. The practice of selling ale directly from the home, whence the north, is becoming increasingly rare. The world has moved on. In the nearby town, and even in the larger villages, the informal alehouse has been almost entirely replaced by the purpose-built tavern or inn. These are permanent, commercial establishments, often owned by men or managed by families as a full-time business. They have dedicated seating areas, multiple rooms, and cellars for storing the new, longer lasting hopped beer. They don't need an ale steak to announce they are open. Their very existence is the sign. Your home, which transforms into a public house for a few days a week, feels like a quaint anachronism compared to these professionalized businesses. The finality of this change is driven home one day when the reeve, acting on a new ordinance from the town council, informs you of a new licensing system. To sell ale commercially, one must now pay for an annual license. The fee is not exorbitant, but it is another layer of formality, another expense, and another way for the authorities to control the trade. This is a crucial historical step, the transition from an informal, customary right to brew and sell, to a formal, state-sanctioned privilege. It marks the end of the assumption that any household could, if they chose, hang out an ale-stake and become a public house. You look at the small profit you make from each batch, after paying for the grain, the firewood, and now this new license. There is very little left. The effort hardly seems worth the return anymore. It has become a trade for those who can operate on a larger scale, who can absorb these costs through volume. The small, independent brewster is being regulated out of existence. Here's a poignant and little-known detail that illustrates this decline, the changing meaning of the ale-stake itself. What was once a proud sign of a woman's enterprise and hospitality began, in some places, to be associated with disorder and illicit activity. Unlicensed and unregulated home selling became the black market of the ale trade. The ale-stake, once a universal symbol of welcome, could now be seen as a sign of a disreputable tippling house, a place outside the bounds of respectable, guild-approved commerce. Your daughter, now the primary brewer, feels this pressure most acutely. She has all of your skill, but she faces a wall of obstacles you never did in your youth. She has to compete with the taverns, navigate the new regulations, and fight against the cultural stereotypes of the greedy alewife. The joy and pride of the craft are being buried under an avalanche of bureaucracy and economic pressure. This leads to a final, sad debate among historians of women's work. Was the decline of the alewife a tragedy, or was it an inevitable, even necessary, step in economic development? The tragedy viewpoint mourns the loss of a unique avenue of economic independence for women. It sees the rise of the guilds and the professionalization of brewing as a patriarchal takeover that impoverished women and stripped them of a vital role in their communities. The inevitable development viewpoint, while not denying the negative consequences for women, argues that the shift was a necessary part of modernization, the move towards larger scale production, standardized products, and the formal cash economy was happening in all trades, not just brewing. The alewife, in this view, was a casualty of a broad and unstoppable economic evolution. One evening, after a particularly slow week with few customers, you and your daughter make a decision. After this last cask is empty, you will not brew another for sale. You will still make small batches for your own family, for weddings and for holidays, but you will no longer hang the red cloth outside your door. The business, the one your mother taught you and you taught your daughter, is no longer sustainable. You go to the door and take down the ale-miner's stake for the last time. The wooden pole is smooth and worn from years of use. The holder by the door, once a sign of your vibrant trade, now looks like a simple, empty bracket. It's a quiet, personal moment, but it represents a massive historical shift, repeated in thousands of homes across the country. An era is ending. The age of the brewster, the independent, home-based female brewer, is over. The silence that follows is the silence of a door closing on a chapter of history. The decision to stop selling ale brings a strange quiet to your household. The familiar rhythm of the week brewing, waiting, selling is broken. There are no more neighbors dropping in with their jugs. No more travelers stopping for a rest. Your home, which for so long had a public face, has become entirely private again. It feels both peaceful and empty. But the craft itself does not die. It simply retreats, returning to its origins as a purely domestic skill. One morning, you find your daughter in the main room, preparing to brew. She is making a large batch for sale. She's making a small cask for the family. just as your own mother did before the idea of selling it became so central to your life. And beside her, watching with wide, curious eyes, is her own young daughter, your granddaughter. You watch as the scene unfolds, a mirror of your own childhood. Your daughter shows the little girl how to scoop the grain, how to judge the heat of the water by the steam, how to stir the mash with the same heavy wooden paddle that you and your mother once used. The knowledge is being passed down one more time, from one generation to the next. This is the enduring power of oral tradition and hands-on learning, a chain of knowledge that exists outside of books and formal apprenticeships. It is a legacy of touch, smell, and instinct. Your daughter takes the gnarled bar-minus stick, your family's living heirloom of yeast, and explains its magic to her child. This, she says, is the soul of our ale. It remembers the taste of all the good batches that came before. In this moment, the stick is more than a tool. It's a tangible link to the past, a vessel containing the invisible essence of your family's history. This passing on of a family's unique yeast strain is a beautiful, if often overlooked, part of culinary history. Long before we understood microbiology, families were curating and maintaining their own unique microbial cultures, a living inheritance that defined the flavor of their home. Use it by the whole. Your hands idle in your lap, and you become the storyteller. You tell your granddaughter about the days when the ale-minus steak was a sign of pride, when the whole village would gather in this very room. You tell her about the grumpy ale-minus taster with his leather breeches, the friendly rivalry with good wife Agnes, and the grand wedding feast you once brewed for. You are curating the family's memory, ensuring that the story of the alewives is not forgotten, even if the profession itself has faded. This act of passing down knowledge in the face of economic obsolescence is a poignant theme in social history. What happens when a traditional craft can no longer provide a livelihood? Does it disappear completely? Historians who study traditional crafts argue that it often survives in a different form. It becomes a marker of cultural identity, a hobby, or a skill practiced for personal satisfaction rather than for profit. The techniques are preserved, not for their economic value, but for their intrinsic worth and their connection to heritage. You are witnessing this transformation firsthand. Your daughter is not brewing for money. She is brewing to preserve a part of her identity, to give her own family the taste of home. There is a quiet debate among historians about what was truly lost when women were pushed out of commercial brewing. Was it just an economic opportunity, or was it something more? Some argue that what was lost was a unique form of female community and social power. The informal network of alewives, with its rivalries and its support systems, was a space where women's work was central and celebrated. When brewing moved to the factory and the guild hall, that female-centric world vanished. The conversations, the shared knowledge, the informal authority, all of it disappeared, leaving a void that was not filled by other professions. As you watch your daughter and granddaughter, you feel a mix of pride and melancholy. You are proud that the knowledge, the art, will continue. The smells and tastes of your family's GRU tale will not be lost to the world of hopped beer. But you are sad that your granddaughter will likely never know the thrill of running her own successful business from her home, the feeling of authority and independence that came with it. She will know the craft, but not the trade. The mash is steeping, filling the room with its sweet, familiar scent. The cycle begins again, not for commerce, but for love. You have passed on the most important thing you owned, not land or coins, but a secret. The secret of how to take the simple gifts of the earth and transform them into something that nourishes the body and warms the soul. It is a legacy that will live on, quietly, in the heart of your family's kitchen. The sun is low in the sky, casting long, golden fingers of light through the open door of your cottage. You are old now, truly old. Your world has shrunk to the size of this room, the bench by the door, and the small garden out back. The great iron cauldron, once the heart of your business, now hangs cold most of the time, used only for heating water for washing or for making the occasional stew. The ale-minus stakeholder by the door is empty, a home for spiders. You sit on your bench, a woolen blanket over your knees, and watch the slow, quiet life of the village pass by. The sounds are different now. There are more carts on the road, more people you don't recognize. The tavern down the lane, with its painted sign of a laughing pig, is noisy with the sounds of men drinking the shop. Bitter beer that has become the standard. It's a foreign sound, a foreign taste. Your granddaughter brings you a small wooden cup. It's filled with the ale she has just finished brewing your family ale. The GRU at ale. You lift it with a trembling hand. The aroma that rises is the scent of your entire life. It's the smell of your mother's kitchen, of your first successful batch, of wedding feasts and market days, of quiet evenings counting coins by the fire. It's a scent of sweet barley, of earthy herbs, of the unique, fruity tang of your family's yeast. It smells, you think, like memory itself. You take a small sip. The flavor is rich and familiar, a comforting warmth that spreads through your chest. It's a taste that is almost gone from the world, a secret kept alive in this one small house. In this moment, you are the living embodiment of a historical tradition that has all but vanished. You are a primary source, a living document. The history of the alewives is not just in the court records or the guild charters. It's in your memory, in the muscle memory of your hands that know how to stir a mash just so. This brings to mind the historical concept of living history or memory studies. Historians today go to great lengths to capture the oral histories of the last survivors of a particular way of life, knowing that when they are gone, a whole universe of knowledge of textures, smells, sounds, and unspoken rules disappears with them. You are the last of your kind in this village. When you are gone, the direct memory of what it was to be a Brewster in the old way will be gone too. Your daughter knows the craft, but she does not know the life. She did not live through the time of the ale-minus tasters, the friendly rivalries, or the terror of the play. Here's a final, little minus known detail about the end of this tradition. In some places, as the alewife faded into myth, she was transformed into a benevolent folklore figure, a patron saint of good drink. Stories might tell of old mother, so minus and minus so, a legendary brewster from long ago, whose ghost was said to help a struggling brewer if they left out a small offering of grain or yeast for her overnight. And so sweet, if ironic, epilogue: the women who were vilified and pushed out of their trade in life were sometimes romanticized and revered in death. You look at the setting sun. The light catches the dust motes dancing in the air, turning them to gold. You think of the long chain of women you are a part of, stretching back into the mists of time. Women who stood over fires, stirring cauldrons, their hands chapped from the water, their faces flushed from the steam. They were not queens or warriors. Their names are not written in the great chronicles, but they were the bedrock of their communities. They nourished their families, hosted their neighbors, and practiced a quiet, powerful magic in their own homes. Your granddaughter sits beside you, leaning her head against your shoulder. You have passed the knowledge on. You have kept the memory alive. The sun dips below the horizon, and the air grows cooler, carrying the familiar evening scents of wood smoke and damp earth. And in your hand, you hold the last, sweet taste of a world that is no more. Your work is done. The day is over. The sweet scent of malt is in the air. The final, gentle perfume at the end of a long and worthy life. And so, your journey, which began with cold water and a handful of grain, comes to a gentle close. The story of the alewife, like the ale she brewed, was something living, something that grew and changed and eventually receded, leaving only its lingering flavor in the memory of the world. The sounds of the tavern fade into the distance, becoming just another part of the night's quiet hum. The fire in the hearth settles into a soft bed of glowing embers, their warmth a silent promise of the morning to come. The world outside your small cottage drifts away, and you are left in this peaceful, timeless space, wrapped in the comfort of a story told, the hustle of the medieval village, the anxiety of a ale-minus taster's visit, the joy of a perfect brew. It all melts away now, becoming part of the soft tapestry of a dream. Let the gentle rhythm of that imagined past carry you now, into your own quiet and peaceful sleep. The work is done. The day is over. Rest now. The end of the article. Good night.